Crash course on Iranian women movements. What is situation of the protests in Iran now? The Iranian women's movement has a long history dating back to the early 20th century. Women in Iran have been fighting for their rights and equality for decades, and despite setbacks and challenges, the movement has made significant progress over the years. In the 1960s and 1970s, Iranian women fought for their rights under the Pahlavi dynasty, which included advocating for the right to vote, access to education, and equal pay. After the Islamic Revolution of 1979, women faced significant setbacks as the new government enforced strict Islamic laws, including mandatory hijab, and limited women's access to education and employment. Despite these challenges, Iranian women have continued to fight for their rights and have made significant progress in recent years. In 2019, Iranian women were allowed to enter football stadiums for the first time in decades, and in 2020, a law was passed that would grant Iranian citizenship to children born to Iranian mothers and foreign fathers. The women's movement in Iran has also played a significant role in the country's political protests in recent years. In 2017 and 2018, Iranian women led protests against mandatory hijab laws, which required women to cover their hair in public. The movement gained international attention when a video of a woman standing on a utility box, waving her hijab on a stick, went viral. In 2019, a series of protests broke out across Iran after the government announced a sudden increase in fuel prices. The protests quickly turned into anti-government demonstrations, with protesters calling for an end to corruption and a change in the country's political system. Iranian women played a significant role in these protests, with many taking to the streets to demand their rights and equality. The situation of the protests in Iran remains tense and uncertain. In November 2019, the government cracked down on the protests, resulting in hundreds of deaths and thousands of arrests. Since then, the government has continued to suppress dissent and limit freedom of expression, including the arrest and imprisonment of journalists, activists, and human rights defenders. The most recent protests in Iran were ignited by the death of 22-year-old Iranian Mahsa Amini, who died on September 16, 2022, after being detained by the country's morality police. The protests have continued since then and have been met with a brutal security crackdown which, according to rights groups, has claimed the lives of over 500 protesters since September 2022. Iranian judicial authorities have pardoned 22,000 people who took part in anti-government protests. Here is a broad timeline of the ongoing series of protests against the government of Iran, sparked by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini on 16 September 2022. September 16, 2022, Mahsa Amini dies in police custody. September 21, 2022, protests begin in Tehran and other cities. September 22, 2022, protests continue in Tehran and other cities. September 23, 2022, protests continue in Tehran and other cities. September 24, 2022, protests continue in Tehran and other cities. September 25, 2022, protests continue in Tehran and other cities. September 26, 2022, protests continue in Tehran and other cities. September 27, 2022, protests continue in Tehran and other cities. September 28, 2022, protests continue in Tehran and other cities. September 29, 2022, protests continue in Tehran and other cities. October 1, 2022, protests spread worldwide to the power of 5. December 8, 2022, Iran executes 23-year-old Mohsen Shakari, accused of blocking a road and using a machete to wound a police officer, on charges of moharba. Despite the risks, Iranian women continue to fight for their rights and participate in protests. In March 2020, on International Women's Day, Iranian women took to the streets to demand their rights, with many holding signs calling for an end to gender discrimination and violence against women. One example of a powerful Iranian woman who has fought for women's rights is Shirin Ebadi. Ebadi was the first female judge in Iran but was dismissed after the Islamic Revolution in 1979. She later became a human rights lawyer and founded the Defenders of Human Rights Center in Iran. In 2003, Abadi became the first Muslim woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in promoting democracy and human rights in Iran. Another example is Nasrin Sotoudeh, a human rights lawyer who has been imprisoned since 2018 for defending women's rights activists and opposing mandatory hijab laws. Sotoudeh has been on a hunger strike several times to protest her imprisonment and the treatment of political prisoners in Iran. In conclusion, the Iranian women's movement has a long and complex history, but women in Iran continue to fight for their rights and equality despite challenges and risks. The situation of protests in Iran remains uncertain, but Iranian women's activism and resilience are inspiring examples of the power of grassroots movements to effect change. Here is a poem on Iranian women movement. To fight for the rights that were often imposed by those in power who sought to control the lives of women who longed to be whole. With voices raised, they marched through the streets, demanding change and refusing defeat. In hijabs or not, they stood side by side and refused to be silenced or to hide. They fought for their freedom, for the right to choose, to wear what they wanted, to speak and to muse, to study and work, and to live as they please, and to be treated as equals, with dignity and ease. Through trials and setbacks, they persevered. With courage and grace, their message was clear, that Iran's women are strong and bold, and their voices cannot be controlled. So, let us stand with them, in solidarity, and amplify their voices, with clarity, to support their cause, and to help them succeed in the fight for their rights, and the change they need. Start planning your next global adventure with ease and convenience with our Booking.com referral link. https://www.booking.com/index.html?aid equals 7989335 as a great choice to plan your next trip. You can find and book flights, hotels, cars, and local attractions all in one place, and their price match guarantee ensures you're getting the best deal. Thank you for kind support our AnHub Metaverse channel, and please watch more interesting videos here.